All right. Thanks for joining tonight. I'm glad you're here. If you are joining live, we do always invite questions, comments, if you are so bold to use the chat section. Throw some questions in. We'd love to have your input tonight. The title for our topic tonight is Unthinking Your Problem. And I have instead of usually I kind of open with like a story, but I'm actually going to open up with a scripture, which is technically the illustration, and it's right from the book of Genesis, Genesis 3, chapter 1 through 6. I imagine many folks, even non-churched folks, would know this story, but this is the story of Eve in the garden, and that she has this conversation with a serpent that deceives her into eating of the tree that God told her not to eat. And it says that just kind of start kind of in the middle of verse 1. Basically, this serpent says, "Did God say you cannot eat of that you must not eat of any tree in the garden?" And the woman answered the serpent, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God has said you must not eat of it or touch it, or you will die." And then the serpent replies, he says, "You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom, she took the fruit and she ate it. Again, this is a story that most folks would probably know, just by any means through your life. It's a story that's often used. It's even very popular in psychology. I've noticed in some of the reading I've done, research and stuff like that. The story's brought up quite often as just kind of a picture of human nature, whether metaphorically or literally. But if you just kind of zoom out and think about this story, objectively, you're not trying to read into it, you're not trying to assume anything from it. One of the things that I thought about with Eve and her response is that she was given this command by God, and then this serpent makes one statement, and all of a sudden, between what God commanded and what this serpent stated, she begins to create and fill in all her own details in this huge narrative, right? She assumes that the tree is good for food because God never actually told her it was good for food. As a matter of fact, he said, if you eat it, you'll die. So for all she knows, this fruit that she's about to eat could be an arsenic fruit. You know what I mean? It could be something that she eats is going to die. And so that's the information, that's the fact. But she assumes it's actually good for food. And then she makes this other assumption that it was desirable in order to make her wise, which is, again, not, God never said it would make her wise or change her knowledge at all. And so she makes this assumption that if I eat this, I'm going to be more wise than I am now. And then she also, by default, assumes that God was actually keeping something back from her that was good, something that, this is actually good, and God's just being stingy, or he's being, a tyrant, or he's being a dictator, or whatever. And so she also assumes that God is technically a liar, because he told her that she would die, and now the serpent has made this statement, and she's grabbing that, and she's saying, I'm going to believe this is truth. Yeah. All of these are assumptions, and she's just taken this and filled in the gaps, right? So the thing that's interesting about this, though, is she makes a decision based on assumptions, and she creates this whole narrative in her mind. And I found out that there's a term in psychology called confabulate. Have you ever heard that word?
Yeah.
So I've this is the first time I've ever heard that. So confabulate, or confabulation, which basically is to unconsciously create or fill in details, explanations, or stories to make sense of an event, memory even when those details are inaccurate or entirely imagined. And so it's kind of an interesting thought process, really, but it's something that I believe is very common. I think almost, if not all of us, do this to one degree or another. Something happens, and our brain automatically starts filling in gaps to try and make sense of what's happening. Yeah. or to try and come to a conclusion that's beneficial to us. And so it's like one of those things, like somebody says something and we assume we know why they said it or what they really meant behind it, right? And so we, without having the emotion, we do this with text all the time, by the way. Somebody says something in a text and we assume the emotion behind it. We don't actually know their feelings. It could be something they said as a joke, and like, why'd they say that? You know, why you don't like me, or you didn't like the way I dress, or something like that. And somebody could be actually trying to pay you a compliment. And we can, before we say, my wife does this with me all the time. I'm totally, I didn't say tell my wife I was going to do this, but she'll be about to say something to me, right? And in her mind, it might be something that maybe I've expressed some disapproval towards, or I have like a bias against, or something like that. And so she'll say, before she says it, now I know you're going to get mad if I say this, so I hesitate to say it. And then she proceeds to say it, right? And so I do this with her and my kids at times. They'll do something, or they'll say something, and I'll assume my kids are being disobedient, right? Even though maybe my wife had told them to do it. It's happened a whole bunch of times, right? In parenting 5 kids, I think it's just one of those things that happens. But I'm trying to get better at not just assuming I know what's happening, and more asking questions. And another thing we do is, well, if this happened, then clearly that means this.
Yeah.
And so we come to a conclusion, again, all made up in our mind, all imagined. And it's funny because we can be super emphatic in our assumption or our conclusion because we've created a narrative. Now, I say all that because in thinking about this and just working through all this, I think that this has consequences in life that are not just limited to relationships, and obviously there's a huge part of that, and I'm sure we'll talk about that tonight, but how often I think that this has consequences even more, spiritually than we might even admit. And this whole idea of making assumptions, we see that with Eve. Her decision wasn't just she ate, a piece of fruit and God smacked her on the hand for it. Like, this had consequences for generations to come spiritually. So, as a pastor, and we'll just say as a I was going to say people person. That's not the right word, but your business is people. You work with people, you counsel people, and so I think from that perspective, you actually have a unique point of view when it comes to this issue of confabulating. There's a whole bunch of other words that kind of describe the same thing, but we'll just stick with that one tonight. How often, when you're working with people and you're dealing with people problems, right? Whether it's people problems that you're personally involved with, or people problems that you're dealing with between 2 other people, or if somebody is just working through. How often would you say that this plays a part in the problems people experience on a regular basis, on a common level?
Always. It really is almost. Yeah, it's almost always. Problems are often. Let's say they're always associated with this in some form or another, because our minds work faster than we can actually control them, and so unless you are patient, you've learned the art of patient thinking, and what I mean by that is to not jump, with the our brains, we come up with a thought, and you'll see this in conversations, and all of a sudden there'll be no room anymore for the other person to talk. The something will be said, and then just maybe some disagreeable body language, something like that kind of communicates that there's another way of looking at this. Even before the word has come out, often there's a rebuttal, and you're already defending your position, but you don't even know what's going to be said yet, because you're only going on such a small amount. You just know there's a disagreement, and you don't even know what the disagreement is, but you don't care because you're going to make sure that your position is well established, and that's what you're describing. That's a lot of how that works. Is that idea? I know you're going to get mad if you say this, kind of a thing. It's funny because I've heard phrases like this, and I take notice of them. It's funny because it's a wasted use of words, because what is it that you're trying to communicate by saying, I know that you're not going to like this, but well, if they're not going to like it, then don't say anything. Just don't say anything, because you're purposely now saying something that they don't like. And so rather than go from that standpoint, that I'm just going to throw this at you and make you deal with it, if why not just start off with a solution? I know if I say this, you're not going to like it, so let me say something else. Let me say it a different way. Let me try to do something so that it's not going to be unlikable. And that's what I do. When during our podcast, and I'll go, it's that I know this is going to come out wrong. So I'm reformulating, because I know that by saying it that way, it could be taken wrong. And so just change the way that you're going to say it if they're going to be upset about it. And so, but that's the reason why there's why it's often involved in the problem, is because you're not, you know what you're up against, but you're not going to do anything about it. You're just going to throw it out there anyway and put something in front of it, and you may be wrong. You may be wrong. So why even go there? Like I know you're going to be mad when I say this. Well, if somebody said that to you, what would happen? Well, you'd be mad. I mean, even before they said what they're going to say, because you're anticipating they're going to say something to make you mad. Because why would you say it otherwise? Why would you preface it by saying, I know this is going to make you mad, but I'm going to make you mad anyway.
Yeah.
And no matter what you say, no matter what you fill in with that, so if it's not the case and you're just exaggerating, well, then you don't need to say it at all. But if it is the case that you're pretty sure that this is going to, trigger something, why say it? Why not try to rephrase it, think of it in another way? And so, but we're not conscious of that. But it's a good habit to be into. If you think that that this is gonna be the case, and so that's kind of a defense against conflating things. When you're gonna fill in blanks and stuff like that. If you think that, I'm not sure if this is gonna make him mad or not, well, don't just jump right out there and say, I know you're going to be mad. And it's not just specifically that. You just happen to bring that one up as an example, but that's the idea. Is when I know this is not a good thing to say, but I'm going to say it. And so it's better to just take that extra second that you're gonna, rather than saying I know that blah blah blah. Why not take that extra second to say something differently?
Okay, so can you give me an example, like of maybe a time when, it's hard to ask this question because I'm asking you to share real life experience here, but like maybe just, you can give this in an abstract way, but give me an example of where, somebody was facing a problem and the confabulation led them into a wrong decision. And like, what were the consequences of that?
Yeah. Well, often the way that it works, I'm as I'm talking, I'll see if anything as an illustration pops in. But the basic thing is that when you're filling in the blanks, and you're making these assumptions that if so what happens is you say, well, this might be the case. Well, if that's the case, then. And now you're going to put a concrete behind something you suspect, and so now you've made that thing the concrete thing, and often in counseling with people, that's often the case, is that something will be said and it'll be, what if that happens? What should I do? So it's like, do you realize what you just described? If it happens, I have no idea what you should do, because let's just hope that never happens, because it hasn't happened, and so because it's based on the idea, okay, this could, so this is in the works, and it could end up like this, and when it ends up like this, then I'm not going to be able to do this, and if I can't do that, then I won't be able to do the other thing, and then half of the Earth will break off, and we'll be in a wobbling orbit. So what should we do then? It's like, well, you know what? I don't think we can do anything. But how confident are you that whatever is about to happen is going to end up with half the Earth breaking off and we're in a wobbly orbit? But that's usually where we go. It's usually that kind of exaggeration. Is it gets out there that this and then this and then this, and we get ourselves into trouble like that because we're just overthinking things.
So okay, so like, yeah, I can't. No stories are coming up. No gritty, dramatic details. I'm sure you have.
Yeah,
I'm sure you have dozens.
Nothing. Well, see, that's the thing, is that with what you're talking about right here, it's so general, and it happens so often. It's hard to tease out something that really stands out from other circumstances like that. There was a guy in our church, who was convinced that I was going to kick him out of church, and he was absolutely convinced that eventually I was going to kick him out of church. And this went on for about 5 years. I mean, literally 5 years. And I tried to have conversations, tried to bridge gaps, tried to establish some things, and it was like, I don't want to get to know you. I don't want to get close to you from his point of view, because I know eventually you're going to kick me out of church. And so everything was associated with, I'm going to kick you out of church. And it got so bad that I had to isolate him from being involved in things in church. I had to isolate him from being involved in things because he was convinced that this was a fact, that I'm going to kick him out of church. It's just a matter of time, and then I asked him, I said, what, you've been thinking this way for so long, why do you think that I haven't done it already? I mean, it's not like if I wanted to kick you out of church, I could have, I'm sure I could have come up with a reason. Everybody has, reasons. There's reasons that I could be kicked out of church. I mean, if you look hard enough, you can. That's why working at companies is so precarious, is because you can be fired for almost anything. And even if you're doing a great job, there's nothing you can do about it. So you just have to be careful that you don't get yourself in the way and get fired. But so the end result of this was, we were just getting nowhere. And I said, okay, I am not sure. It seems to me that you're pretty convinced that this is it, and I'm going to kick you out. Why don't you just leave? And so then the thing came through that I realized in his response to that was that he wanted to leave, but he wasn't. He was waiting for me to kick him out, but he wanted to leave, and so it was like, okay, all right, But the frame of mind is all fabricated. The whole thing was fabricated because it's like he wanted me to kick him out to get it over with, because he knew I wanted to kick him out. So he's like, just get this over with, because he was tired of being here, because he knew eventually I was going to kick him out. And so I told him, I said, okay, you're officially kicked out. I said, there you go. You're now officially kicked out. And I said, now you can go write a letter, and ask other pastors. You've been kicked out of your church. Can you go to their church? And that's exactly what he did. He didn't waste any time at all. It was within minutes that he sent off an email, trying to find another church, and it was like, but in his mind, I kicked him out of church, because I said, okay, it's official. I'm officially kicking you out of church. I have no reason, there's nothing. We didn't discuss anything. I just said, I basically, I told him, I said, you know what, you don't want to be here anymore, and so, why don't you go? Why don't you just go? And he needed that. He needed that, that seal of approval, because he's faithful, And so the whole thing was crazy. I mean, it was just so sad to watch this happen, because it was somebody who had been in the church for like 15 years, and then just all of a sudden just got this idea that I wanted to kick him out of church. And what started it was I asked him, because I just felt like he was acting really strange. And I asked him, I said, are you thinking about leaving church or something? Because he just seemed to be isolating himself, and he's like, no, but I've been expecting you to kick me out of church, which caught me off guard. I was totally shocked. I didn't expect it at all. And like I said, that went on for 5 years, and so it was like, wow, and there's just no getting around it. There's nothing you can do. This isn't a stupid person. This is a person who's got an education, but there was nothing that could be said that could help him to see the truth of the situation, because he had it convinced. He was convinced. It's a way of thinking. When you think that you have the ability to perceive other people's thoughts, that's where the big problem comes in. I think more than anything else is that when you think you could perceive what somebody's thinking. And what's funny about it, especially for us as Christians, is that the devil will seed our minds with thoughts, and so when he sees that kind of a thing, somebody's perceiving, the thoughts of another person, well, he'll fill in the blanks, he'll be part of the process, of conflating thoughts and facts. He'll help, he's thinking like this, and this is happening like that, and that other thing's happening like that.
So it's interesting, actually. I was reading in 2 Samuel, a story that I've thought about quite a bit, actually, from the standpoint of suspicion, but it actually fits. And there's a story about a king that dies in 2 Samuel. He's the king of the Ammonites, and apparently him and David were on good terms with each other.
Yes,
He's somewhat allies.
That's a good example.
And so he sends some representatives. David does to the son who inherited the throne, and basically he talks to his counselors, and they're basically saying, no, they're actually here to spy out the land. And so they shave these guys' beards, and then split their clothes down the back, and then send them on their way as kind of an insult. And so it's very interesting to me, because there was nothing except for some voices in the ear telling him that this was the case, and that there was no proof whatsoever. And so I guess my question is, how linked is, I know we're talking about thinking, but we're also talking about how thinking leads to decision making. And so how often do you think there's what would you say is, like, I know this is a really hard thing to quantify, but what would you say is like the motivation behind this thinking? Is it what we want, or is it something we fear?
That's what I was that was the thing I was going to say, is that is the motivating factor, is fear. We don't, our pride doesn't allow us to acknowledge that it is a fear, but it is a fear. It's a fear that if I don't act first, I'm going to be acted upon. And so which is fear. Because if there's no visible reason to respond to something, then the fear is you're going to be caught off guard, because you won't have had the first shot.
Right.
And so that's what happens is fear. It's not what you want to happen. That's why, like, that circumstance that I was describing, is that I'm sure if I could get in and dissect the thinking, behind all of this. The idea wasn't I'm looking for another church, because that wasn't the issue. The issue was I perceive things, are wrong and they need to be corrected, and but yet there was nothing to correct because there was nothing that was wrong. It was a complete fabrication of mental process. And so it's a fear. It's a fear of how, this is what's going on. And, like you mentioned Eve, here's an opportunity for me to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and become like God, knowing good and evil. And this is going to be good for food. This is going to be beneficial to me. And she has her FOMO, I have fear of missing out. I've got to eat of this tree because this tree is going to give me what I need. And if I don't eat it, I'm going to miss out. Yeah. There's going to be that somehow I'm going to have missed it.
That's interesting. So, is this like a mix of the two? Actually, I'll ask this question that just came in. I think it's a perfect fit for right here if you want to add anything to it. But this may have been covered. Where do you think overthinking comes from? A need to be in control or a fear of losing control?
Yeah. Well, I don't think. I would say that it's not either of those because it's not an issue of control. The overthinking is, in general, it where it comes from is we do not understand how our brains work. It's very common. I would say that, your typical person for the most part doesn't realize that they have control over what they do with thoughts. They understand, and it is true, thoughts come into our minds randomly, and we have no control of the thought from nowhere. We don't have any control of that. You can't stop a thought from nowhere coming into your mind. But once that thought has laid hold or has been laid hold of, what we do with that thought is entirely in our control. And that's the thing that I think there's quite a number of people don't understand. And so what happens, and I thought about a little thing, I've been thinking about this a little bit because this idea of overreacting, because what happens is you go inside your head. I mean, literally, when this process starts happening, you're not looking anymore. You're really not using your eyes anymore. Your peripheral is almost non-existent. And the only thing you can see is like two little dots in front of you. This is a physical understanding. And so I thought about a little help to, you can catch yourself when this is happening, is as soon as you feel yourself getting excited about something, getting stirred up about something, look purposely, you don't need to turn your eyes specifically, but focus perfectly, what is in my peripheral right now? And you'll realize you have been looking, your eyeballs are backwards looking into the back of your head. You have no idea what's going on, around you. You have no idea. But if you that moment, and then ask yourself, what's over here? And what's over here? Just outside of my main vision, in my peripherals. What is over there? And if you can do that before you think, before you even start to work on this thought, you will go down a whole different direction of that thought. That thought will go a completely different way. Because like, oh my God, okay, you get some letter in the mail or something like that, and it's bad news. And immediately, if that happens, then this will happen, and then that happened, and that happened, and then you're going, and then all of a sudden you're not reading anymore. You are a blind person holding a piece of paper, and you're basically looking at the back of your head. If you can just stop yourself and just say, what's out here? And take the moment by the time, because it's going to take you a second to get things worked out. You'll find that will break that freight train running off the cliff. And you'll see that you do have control over your thoughts. You do. It's not necessary that this race occurs where you just get into this situation where things just kind of spin out of control. It's not necessary. It's not a requirement. If you'll just stop and just ask yourself, what's on either side of me? Because it'll take you, like I said, you'll first the one, then the other. And that may take you 5-10 seconds, depending on how worked up you are in your head. I mean, more than likely, realistically, it's going to be 1 or 2, maybe 3 seconds. But try it and see. You'll see that all of a sudden, your mind will have derailed from that crazy direction you were going, and now you'll have to decide: do I want to go back there and freak out myself?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see you have thoughts. You have control of your thoughts, and that is the issue. The issue is more. It's not so much that you are a fear of losing control or are a control freak. It's the fact that you have lost control already. You've already lost control, and you need to regain control.
Mm-hmm. So okay, let me ask another question here in this same. Well, how often do you think this is a positive thing versus a negative thing? Like
what I'm talking. What we're talking about right now.
Yeah. So do you think it's common for people to spin a narrative towards a positive conclusion?
No.
How come this goes so often towards the negative?
Because of how it works. Because it's not based on. It's not technically thinking.
Like we often don't assume
it's
best,
free.
do we?
But it's freewheeling. Where it's not. Anything that freewheels is always is negative at some point. Because it's not being directed by anything. It's just running off, and it may be running in the right direction, but it's not purposely running in the right direction. And so it's not so much that the process itself is bad. It's that the process itself is out of control. And so anything that's out of control is going to eventually, leave the realms of good, and go into something bad. Because it's just the way that life works. The only way that good can happen is intentionally. You can do good things accidentally, but they're not considered good things. That's just not the way that it works. You pick something. I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head, and there's so many things that fit that criteria. But anything that you do by accident, you can't take credit for. So you can't say, oh yeah, or that was really good that you did that. We can lie, like that commercial.
Yes.
We just heard this commercial about somebody buying a $70 coat that's worth $200 and giving it to somebody else, and the tagline was it's her thought that counts, the other person's thought. So the other person thought that you did something really great, but you didn't do something really great. And the truth is you didn't do anything really great. You got a $70 thing and you get handed it off as if it was worth $200, and so you haven't done something good.
Okay, another question is on the idea of overthinking. Is it possible to become addicted to overthinking? Like you have to understand X, Y, Z.
Well, it isn't that you become addicted to overthinking. Actually, overthinking is probably not the best way to describe it, because that would imply that there's something intentional about it. It's freewheeling. Like I said, it's just freewheeling. It's not thinking. That's the problem. It's not thinking. And that's what gets us into trouble, is we're just letting thoughts build up, and so it's not an addiction thing. Well, there is an addiction associated with this, but it's not an addiction to the thinking. It's an addiction to what happens to you chemically as a result of letting your thinking go. And that really is what it is like when you stop thinking and you begin to function, you're emoting. That's the term, is you're emoting. You're not thinking, you're emoting. And emotions are all chemical based. They make you feel things. And and so you can be addicted to the idea of not thinking because you love the feeling of emoting. You know, it's funny because I know people like this that they life is just one chaotic event after another for them, you know, and you notice this because you ask them how they're doing, and they really have to think about some bad thing that's happened. They have to think, gosh, man, it's been a bit for a bad thing that's happened to me. I remember, you know, and because they live there, they live there. They have to keep that bad vibe going, that sense of chaos, that sense of being, overwhelmed because they're addicted to cortisol. It's just they like the numbing experience of everything being out of control all the time. And the tragedy of that. People who are like that, they get addicted to that. It's the same kind of a thing as a drug addict. This is something that begins to destroy the systems in your body that are associated with the control of those chemicals. And so you're forcing your body to produce chemicals in an amount that it's not designed to do. And so the result is that it tries to fix you in the process. So your body is trying to fix you, but you're so stuck on this vibe that you're fighting against it, and it usually ends up, that's why the Bible talks a lot about the things that are associated with sickness, thinking things, there's a sickness that's associated with it. The Bible says bitterness dries the bones. That there's when bitterness is an emotion. You allow that to happen, and so the Bible gives us this interesting insight into the idea that this can cause medical problems. It dries the bones, like osteoporosis, from being bitter. And there's lots of types of thoughts like that all through the Bible. It doesn't obviously mention them in that way, but it does talk about the negative effect that these things have on your physical body. But we do it anyway, even though we're losing control of our bodies. They're aging us, people who, they're 30 years old and they've got gray hair and they're proud of it. Yeah, I had such a stressful life, and it's like, yeah, but you do realize that these are signs of things. It's that you need to be careful that you're not killing yourself slowly by letting your brain free wheel in anxiety and different things like that.
Okay, so how often do you, or how easy do you think it is? And the reason why I'm asking this question is I'm wondering if this is something we often stand alone on, or do you think that when we think this way, we also are very commonly able to find support for the way we're thinking?
Oh, you can always find support for everything. It doesn't matter what it is. You'll find support. Misery loves company. That's my mom taught me that as a young kid. That thought, and it's true. I've seen it. It's what was the line from Lady and the Tramp? It was a quote: "Miserable being finds miserable being, and
Wow.
then they're happy."
I don't remember that quote at all. I haven't seen that since I was a little
Yeah, it's
kid.
Lady and the Tramp. Well, the reason why I mentioned it, or I thought of it, and it's been kind of locked into my thinking, is it just how much cartoons and kids stuff has changed. That is an actual line, from a well-known, for somebody who has what's the word that you would use? They're in society. They were, they knew. They went to shows and went to theater and went to people like that. That were, they would know the the author of that quote.
Okay, yeah.
And but it's funny, that it's true though. It is true. The idea, like I said, misery. We've modernized it now as misery loves company, but that whole idea of that people, people like being miserable. There is a chemical reward for being miserable. And that's bad. That's not a
Clearly.
good thing.
Okay, so here's the reason why this became kind of an inspiration for doing this as a podcast, is that how does this play out spiritually? I mean, we've said this before on the podcast, but the world is much more spiritual than people would like to admit or even give a lot of thought to. And we like to think of life as an analog world, but it is very much so a spiritual world.
Well, I don't know.
I'm not talking about relating it to it's just
physical, not analog.
Physical, yeah, physical is, and the idea is that we don't put enough thought towards the spiritual repercussions or consequences or even rewards in the things we do in this life. And so my question is, how does this play out in our response to, as humans, our response to God, heaven and hell, sin, morality? How does this way of thinking or coming to conclusions play out in that? Especially because,
well, I would before you get to the ultimate judgment, I would kind of pull back a little bit, or a lot of it, and talk about the standpoint that we aren't just physical beings, we are spiritual beings. And this is, we know this, and we, how to describe it, because this isn't a question of theism. It's not a question of do you believe in God or not. There is a spiritual reality, and what I mean by that is we are more than physical, and we know that. We live in a world where there are invisible forces at work, and we're familiar. We know this. We know this. I was reading was it a book I was reading, or was it a podcast or something? I can't remember. The guy was talking about how he was standing. It was a book. It was an example from a book, from a counseling session in a book, and the guy was on the phone, and he felt this pain, this very sharp pain in his back, and he turned around, and his wife was looking at him with very, very angry look on her face. She was very, very upset with him, and he wasn't being, he wasn't just being illustrative. He was talking about it. He wasn't talking about the pain as much as talking about the reality that he had said something and his wife was upset that he said that, and how the whole thing played out, and how he could have done things differently. So he wasn't really talking about that idea, but that whole transaction is, there's nothing physical there. Why did he feel a pain in his back? Because his wife was looking at him with an angry look on her face. Her being angry with him. Why did he feel that physically in his body? That she was looking at him in anger. And that he's not. It's not. You can't say, oh yeah, no, he didn't feel it, because we've all been there. You get this feeling, somebody's staring at you, and you turn around and you watch somebody's gaze go the other direction, and they were staring at you, and you can feel that they were staring at you, because we are spiritual. There's more going on than just the material world. And so when we're talking about these kinds of issues of the problems and how you're processing them in your mind, they're three-dimensional. They're not just contained in your head. They don't just stay there. They're three-dimensional. They have a substance to them, and they affect other things in life. They are not. You can't just isolate them. You can't just say because you're racing in your mind and you're thinking about all this crazy stuff in your mind that it's just limited to your mind. No, it's beginning to play out in your life. It's having an influence in your life, and let go long enough, it will have a physical repercussion. But it starts as a mental, but there's, the mental and physical are connected to each other, and that's what I'm referring to when I talk about spiritual, is that life is more than just simply the material things that are going on.
Mm-hmm. So I guess because I'm thinking about, like, if we just assume, okay, I believe God is real, but the question now is, like, what is my thought towards that in the bigger picture? And I was thinking about that because there's a scripture. I'm just applying the logic of the scripture to this way of thinking. But in 1 John 4 verse 20 says, anybody that says they love God and hates his brother is a liar.
Yeah.
Right. And then he goes on to say, for anyone who does not love his brother whom he can see cannot love God whom he has not seen.
Right.
And so I was just thinking about this, like, because if we do this with people, right, on a social level, if we're able, and we do this commonly, to make assumptions about people and about responses and about what people are going to do, and we try to read into emotion, we subconsciously read into emotions and stuff like that. Is this something that we do with God? Like, we see this in the story of Eve, is kind of what I'm after, is because, or what I'm asking for elaboration on, because she makes all these assumptions about God.
Yeah.
And comes to these conclusions about God based on what was happening in front of her and what was going on in her mind.
Yeah, because there's no limits, So the idea, like I said, about being spiritual is there's no limits to this. You don't, like, so what I was saying is you don't just, you can't isolate this just to your thinking. It's not, you're not, you might think you're just, caught up in stupid thinking, and that's all it is, but it's more than that, but that's where the problem lies, is that when you don't understand how far-reaching the consequences are when we begin to let our minds race like that, and where it takes you, because it doesn't have, there's no guardrails, when you do that, which is, again, going back to that question about the idea of being in control or not being in control or being addicted. Those questions having to do with that, is the idea is there's no guardrails in that kind of behavior. So regardless of you might be able to put a positive spin on it and say something like, it's an addiction, or I'm just a control freak, or I just don't want to be out of control. You can put a nice face on it any way that you want to, but the bottom line is that it's toxic. It is caustic to normalcy. It doesn't. You cannot. When you think about, if you analyze, I go round and round and round the just the few thoughts that happened there with Eve, and the context is, there's such a huge contrast, because you've got somebody who's literally had everything given to them. There's no trouble, there's no pain, there's no problems, there's no issues, there's no nothing. She's got as much information and knowledge as anyone needs. She isn't in need of anything else. She's not. There's nothing that she can't accomplish or work out. That I need that tree. I need that tree because there's something lacking in my experience. There's nothing lacking in her experience. It's purely this freewheeling working of her thinking. It's good for food. Okay, well, I'm sure there are a lot of things that are good for food. I'm sure there was a ton of things in the garden that were good for food. We live in a very fallen world now, and I can't think of any food that I would be willing to give up something very, very, very valuable to me, like my life, in order to have.
Mhm.
You know, and that's in a fallen world. You know, where she is, she's probably surrounded with goodness. You know, but yet she's got to have it. You know, that's all there is to it. She's got to have it, and the reason she's got to have it has really nothing to do with the conclusions that she came to. It has everything to do with the fact that she was in a fog. She was in a haze because of the way she was thinking. She was not in reality anymore. You know, she was out of her mind. You know, she's willing to eat from a tree that's going to kill her. We're not talking about a tree that might kill her. She's willing to eat from a tree that's going to kill her just as long as she can take that first bite and have that experience of being like God and knowing good and evil and die. You know, if I can have that, then this is all going to be worth it. And talk about unreasonable. There's just nothing reasonable about that at all. It's just getting caught up in the freewheeling of her mind. You know, and fortunately, you know, she's dealing with a gracious God, or else that would have been it. You know,
Yeah.
Congratulations. You know, now you've eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now you're dead. And so now let's go on and talk about life, you know, for the next several thousand years without you here. You know, just,
Yeah. Okay, so last 10 minutes. I think we have time for 2 more questions. But the question I was going to ask is, in your experience with, again, so, I mean, everything we do as a church is very aimed at providing a way for people to, you know, essentially come to the knowledge of God, right? And
Yes.
have a personal, what we call revelation of God and his existence and who Jesus really was and is, and so it's interesting because when I have conversations with folks, I often come across a lot of assumption about God. It's not knowledge-based thinking. It's, well, this is what I believe.
Yeah.
And so it is very much so, you know, an assumption. It's not, you don't have any fact to back this up.
Yeah.
And so how do you, I'm kind of combining the 2 questions into one just to save time, but how do you back out of that way of thinking, whether you're a believer in God or not? How do you back out of that way of thinking so that you can actually see life?
well, like I said,
Clearly.
that, you know, breaking the, you know, just simply breaking the concentration, you know,
But
like
how
I
do you
said,
know you're there is kind of my point here.
you know you're there when you're there. You know you're there. Yeah, you know you're there. It's not an unconscious thing. You know that you're there. You're like I said, you know, that's one of the first indicators is you can't see anymore. You're not looking at things out here. You're inside your own head. Physically, I mean, it's not that, you know, because what happens is as your brain begins to go there, you know, there are parts of your brain that they literally begin to shut off, you know, having to do with logic and reason, and you have a you know, we called it in California a brownout. Is that there's certain circuits in your life, in your mind, that they just go offline. You know, they're not there anymore, and that's why I said about the eye thing, because you'll notice it when you're browning out like that. You'll notice that one of the power conserving mechanisms is to reduce your ability to focus. You know, so what you're doing when I said that, when you what's out here, all of a sudden, you know, your circuits are starting to come back on again, and you know, it's not. You realize, wow, this is easier than I thought it would be to control. You know, because if you're willing to do that, you know, that's what it comes down to. Yeah, there has to be a willingness to get out of there, because, you know, it's also an opportunity for another hit, you know, and so if you decide what's out here, that hit goes away, and so now you're jonesing, you know, so it's like, no, listen, I don't care what's out here. Right now, I've got to work this through, because you want to stay there, you want to be there.
I've had this happen at night a few times. I'm trying to place myself in that example, but I've had this happen at night before, where I'm laying down and there's just different problems and issues in life that I'm thinking about, and before I realize it, I'm 2 hours in and I haven't fallen asleep yet.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I realize, man, I can't sleep.
Yeah.
And so there have been times, especially recently, because I've started just trying to trick myself out of thinking. But I'm sitting there and I stop and I can actually think about the fact that my mind is spinning a narrative.
Yeah.
And I'm actually I'm okay, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
This is going to happen as
Yeah.
well. Oh, great. This is going to happen. And then there's been times where I've had to just get up out of bed.
Yeah.
And just walk around the house for a second.
Yeah.
And then come back and lay back down. And it's interesting how often I've been able to just fall back asleep or fall to sleep
Yeah.
in the first place. But it's interesting because there have been many times where that didn't happen. And I'm so zoomed in, and this is kind of why I'm asking the question, is when you're that zoomed in, is this like a habit? Because how do you because what you're saying sounds like something you need to develop the ability to do before you get into the zone, that zone in your brain.
Well, it is. Yeah, it is something that you have to be aware of it before you can start doing things about it. But that's where it begins. Is you have to be aware of the fact that you've got this stuff going on in your head. But honestly, I know for me personally, the issue really is, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. It's like that's not I'm obviously not praying that prayer, but that kind of attitude, that kind of posture. You know what? If I die before I wake, take my soul. It's like whatever happens, I've got to put it in your hands. There's nothing I can do about it. So it's not a bad, I think like that. That's how I think, and then that way, when things happen, because the funny thing is that, if you're like that, but you're not addicted to cortisol only, it doesn't take long. If you can land on a thought that will spin you off into happy land, well, if this happens and then that happens and then the other thing happens, they're both just as fictitious, but one is a much nicer fantasy than the other. So you can, your brain just does that. It just makes stuff up and gets you all excited about stuff, and it, it's like going into the convenience store and buying a lottery ticket. It's just the chances of you winning are just as much, no matter what you do. Whether you get your lucky Tuesday, lottery ticket, or you get or you have your lucky pen that you use, or your lucky scratcher, or whatever. None of those things make any difference in terms of the outcome. But should you hit it, it was the lucky scratcher. And if you miss it, I should have brought my lucky scratcher. And but it isn't reality. None of that is reality, and it's true about all the issues and problems that we have to deal with in life. All fall along the same lines. Is that there's no if this and then that and then that and then that and then that. None of those things. You just you getting all spun out about a thing is not. There's nothing beneficial. It doesn't benefit. So stop spinning out. Do work on not spinning out. But like you said, the solution is, regardless of what triggers you, immediately learning how to put that in God's hands. Regardless. So you don't have to worry about the outcome. Or how bad things are going to be or how good things are going to be. Just okay, God's in control. I'm gonna let God handle this. And God is in control. And whatever that means, that it's because it's the only stability in life. That's why I think it's so funny is that, having been a Christian for 40 years, a number of people that they're Christian atheists, when it comes right down to it, is they really don't they really don't believe that God has their best interests in mind. They just, they'll go to church and they'll do this and they'll do that, but it's like they're trying to sneak their way into heaven. They're trying to, they're look, okay, I'm not gonna, it's like when Jesus talks about leading me into temptation. Do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us to evil. We take that, much further. It's like, you're not tempting me. You're not going to get me out of heaven. There's nothing you can do, God, that's going to keep me. No. I'm going to fix this over here, and I'm going to fix that thing over there, and I'm going to make this work this way, and this is going to work this way, and this other thing over here, and and if this happens, then I'll be able to do that. And if that doesn't happen, then this over here. You got yourself all worked up because you can't rely on God. You have no confidence that God's going to help you with anything. You've got to work this all out on your own because you're afraid somehow, some way, I'm going to be 78 years old and I'm going to be, getting close to dying, and then, and then you're going to make something happen to me. I'm going to be ready. I'm going to be ready. So when you do that to me, I'm going to make it. It's this weird thinking. And you'd say, I don't know anybody who thinks like that. They don't talk like that. They think like that, but they don't talk like that. Very, very different. They're gonna get into heaven. They're gonna make this work. It doesn't matter if God helps them or not. They're gonna hedge their bet. They're gonna they've got a little scam. It involves a little bit of sin, but it's gonna make them money so that they'll be able to take care of it in case God decides He wants to test them by not giving them enough money. They're gonna have a lot extra money so that they can use that money. All kinds of weird thinking.
Yeah. Well, 8 o'clock. We'll end there, and we do appreciate your joining tonight. If you're watching after the fact, thanks for taking the time and watching the podcast. We'd love for you to come back and watch in person or watch live every Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. We do this podcast live so that you have a resource to be able to ask questions if you're curious, and or if the topic just sparks some questions in your mind. But we will be here again next week, 7 o'clock, same time, same place. Encourage you to check out our YouTube page. Some of the videos that are all the videos we do, and whether it's our services or special events, most of the time are streamed. These podcasts are in a playlist there. You can go check out more of our content there. And so encourage you to do that. Otherwise, we'll be here again next week. Thanks for joining. See you then.